By 1994, Doctor Who had been off the air for 5 years. It wouldn't come back for another 2 years. And that was just for the one-off TV movie. Yet somehow Doctor Who magazine was still being published every month, as indeed it still is to this day. But what did it contain? Let's have a look at some of the highlights. So this is the first 90s issue I have, issue 208. The main feature is an interview with Wendy Padbury, who played Zoe. And she talks about how she and Patrick Troughton and Fraser Hines used to keep pulling each other's trousers off. Different times. There's an original comic strip from Dan Abnett and John Ridgway, with some very nice artwork. And it has a rare visual appearance of the companion Bernie Summerfield, who's usually only found in books and audios. Speaking of which, the reviews section has reviews of 2 new adventures novels, one of which, Conundrum, I went out and bought shortly afterwards, and now I've got pretty much the whole set. Next we have issue 209, with a black and white photo of William Hartnell on the cover. This has a feature on the unmade story The Giants by C.J. Webber, which would have been the very first Doctor Who story, but they decided to go with Anthony Coburn's An Unearthly Child instead. Who knows, maybe if they'd gone with this one, C.J. Webber's descendants may have been a little more reasonable, and the first story would not have been banned from iPlayer. And Dimensions in Time had just been broadcast. The comic strip gives a good indication of how the fans at the time thought about it, as does the letters pages, and the review section as well, which rips it to shreds, but concludes it was just a bit of fun for charity, so it shouldn't be judged too harshly, which is fair enough, I guess. Issue 210 has a slightly out of focus Tom Baker on the cover, and there's an interview with Philip Hinchcliffe, which is interesting because I've just finished reviewing all of his stories. Interesting, it says that he left the show because he'd been there for 3 years and he was asked to move on. Nothing to do with him being sacked because the show was too violent. So maybe that's an urban myth. Issue 211 has Sylvester McCoy and Sophie Aldred on the front. And the news section debunks the rumours that Steven Spielberg was going to cast David Hasselhoff as the new Doctor Who. But who knows, in an alternate universe, David Hasselhoff may have gone on to star in countless series of Big Finish audio dramas. Issue 212 has another black and white cover. Can't imagine those sold too well. And it's got an interview with Deborah Watling about her time on the show, including her appearance in Dimensions in Time, and complaining about her scenes being cut from the 30 Years in the TARDIS documentary. I seem to remember all those scenes were restored for the extended version on video. Issue 213 has a big interview with Peter Davison. It looks like the first in a series. This one just covers how he got started in the series. It says the impersonations of previous Doctor and Castrovalva were his idea. Then he moves on to Fort of Doomsday, where he struggles to find a good word to say about it, which is fair enough. A few months later, we have issue 217 with a Lalla Ward interview. And she does talk a bit about her relationship with Tom Baker, which is quite interesting. She's clearly dead against what they used to call political correctness, and would be called woke nowadays. She responds to the feminist complaints about her character's outfits by saying she wished she was even more provocative and wore even shorter skirts. The mind boggles. Issue 218 has a decent photo on the cover for once. And there's an interview with Sarah Sutton, talking about the tense atmosphere when she was with Tom Baker, and a much better atmosphere when she was with Peter Davison and Janet Fielding. There's also a story about how a fan at a convention invited her to his hotel room, but Jonathan Turner persuaded her not to go. He must have been livid when he read that interview. She nearly came! Bloody Jonathan Turner! Then we have issue 219, with an interview with Caroline John, which is pretty good, in which she says she didn't leave the show because she was pregnant. She was fired before she could tell them. Issue 220 has a cover all about Frontios. And there's an interview with Peter Purvis, in which he talks all about his time on Doctor Who and on Blue Peter as well. He says that by now his character would have become a fascist dictator and had millions of concubines. I don't know if Big Finish ever did that story, but it would certainly be interesting. Issue 221 has an interview with Caroline Ford with the title An Earthly Woman, which sounds a bit dodgy, especially as there's several photos of her wearing not very much. But it's a decent interview, going all the way from when she was cast in Doctor Who to playing the role again in Dimensions in Time. Issue 222 has an interview with Richard Franklin, who played Mike Yates. He says, obviously it would have been lovely if it had become the Mike Yates show. I think he was an interesting enough character to have developed it. I don't agree, but there you go. Issue 223 is mainly about the Armageddon Factor, with a big interview with the director, and the archive feature going into its production. Issue 224 has the second Doctor on the cover. There's an interview with Andrew Cartmel about his first season on the show. Talking about his fractious relationship with Pip and Jane Baker, and complaining about the lighting and effects, all of which is quite reasonable, really. And there's an article all about the state of the internet in 1995, when it was all news groups and FTP servers, and maybe a few World Wide Web pages if you were lucky. Issue 225 has more Andrew Cartmel interview, this time about season 25. It says he tried to get Alan Moore to wait for the show, but he couldn't manage it, which is a shame. And there's an interview with Michael Craze, who played Ben the Sailor. The best bit is when he says that he and Annika Wills greeted Patrick Troughton wearing t-shirts reading "Come back Bill Hartnell, all is forgiven." If only there was footage of that. Issue 226 has an interview with Nicholas Courtney, which is 6 pages long and only goes up to the Silurians, so plenty of detail there. There's an interview with Philip Seagal, who would produce the TV movie the following year. It doesn't really tell you anything about his plans, but there is an artist impression of the console room, which didn't end up looking anything like that. Issue 227 has Peter Davison on the cover. There's an interview with Mark Strickson. He complains that his character wasn't allowed to be too intelligent or have relationships with any of the women, and how he tries to put relationships and love interests in, even when they're not written. And he says that filming in Lanzarote for Planet of Fire was not as fun as you might expect. There's an interesting comic strip, which is basically a two-hander between Davros and the Sixth Doctor. I'm not sure where it's meant to come in the continuity, but it's pretty interesting all the same. And the review section has a review of Original Sin, the new adventure which introduced the 2 new companions. I never managed to find it on the shelves at the time, so that was the point at which I stopped buying the new adventures, which possibly explains why I stopped buying the magazine shortly afterwards as well. Finally, we have issue 228, with K9 on the cover, and an interview with John Leeson. And it talks about how he had quite a good relationship with Tom Baker, which was quite rare for anybody at the time. The next issue box promises a look at Downtime, more Nicholas Courtney interview, and an archive on the Face of Evil. But by then I must have lost interest, as I stopped buying the magazine altogether. Well, I hope you've enjoyed that trip down memory lane. I didn't buy Doctor Who magazine again until 2005, when the show came back on the air. So maybe I'll look through some of my magazines from that era at a later date. Meanwhile, please like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. See you next time.